Hey folks, this is Shane from Performance EV. Today we're going to take a look back at our 2020. Hey folks, welcome to the channel. Thank you so much for joining us. 2020, what a year. Yeah, I'm not going to delve too deep into what happened in the wider world. I just want to look back at what happened with this channel and with my projects. So for those of you new to this channel, this is my project to put a Nissan Leaf motor into a Porsche 911, and I had kind of hoped that at some point over 2020 I'd actually get this car on the road, but that didn't happen. And I was thinking about that recently, and I was a little bit frustrated by it. But then I kind of looked back at my channel and at all the videos that I'd released over the year, and actually we've made some really good progress. So what I wanted to do today was just kind of look back at it and see where we started this time a year ago, and yeah, where we are now. And that will kind of allow me to sign off 2020 feeling I've achieved something. And then we'll do another video, maybe even tomorrow, who knows, just to look forward and see what we're going to try and do for 2021, be it with the channel, with the car, yeah. But yeah, for now, 2020. So I think 2019 was a lot of me kind of taking a lot of theoretical knowledge that I built up over the years in terms of electric motors and all that sort of thing, and just getting some practical experience of getting it running. So we'd managed to get the motor running on the bench, get the new controller into the inverter and all that sort of stuff. And for 2020, I think we were actually, or coming into 2020, we were actually in a pretty good place when it came to being in a position to actually try and get that motor running in the car. I'd spent the better part of a month figuring out how to actually install the motor, what orientation I was going to use, whether I was going to use the gearbox or not, all that sort of stuff. And we created some mounts and that sort of thing. So the car was in a good place, the motor was in it, and we really started the year with just trying to get the wiring in. So big focus was of course the high voltage wiring between the inverter and the motor, because in the Leaf those are just bolted directly together, so there's no wiring loom that I could steal or wiring harness I could steal. I had to go and build it myself. But we got that made from scratch, shielded as well. So with the high voltage wiring kind of put together, the other key thing we needed, having inverter and motor in the car, was a battery pack. Now at the time I didn't have the pack I have now, so I just had a bunch of lead acid batteries that I managed to get my hands on, and they kind of made up a modular battery option for me. So yeah, I could get up to I think about 250 volts, but for the early part of the testing and just trying to get things running, that was going to be overkill. So I think I hooked up something like 70 volts worth, so about 6 batteries in series, and connected them through my pre-charge circuit into the inverter, and yeah, then held my breath. All right, back for another try. Everything's switched on again. As I mentioned, I've changed some settings, so here we go. It's all right. I can see the throttle signal increasing. Oh, current's changing. I hear an engine. It's moving. So with the wheels turning, even if it was just at 70 volts, the next logical step for anyone doing something like this is you want to run it on the ground. Fortunately, outside this garage door I've got a couple of meters of driveway, so I thought at the very least try and run it back and forth up the drive. But the challenge is that at the end of the driveway there's a main road, and I did not fancy the prospect of starting and not being able to stop. If something had gone wrong, the inverter gotten stuck on, and I couldn't change, didn't have the brakes working, then there's every chance that the car would have either hit the gate posts or gone out onto the road and potentially been hit by something coming from either direction. I didn't want that, so I had to really, yeah, I just had to accept that I was going to have to fix the brakes. They were a problem with the car from the start. I thought initially that it was just going to be a simple bleed and that would be done. But the problems were far deeper than that and kind of went right into the core of the brake system. Basically both the master cylinder and the brake booster were leaking. So master cylinder was ending up leaking brake fluid into the brake booster, so neither of them was doing their job. So I had to replace both of those parts, and then fully rebleed the system again because there was going to be a ton of air in it. It took a while, but it made such a difference. The brakes worked, but of course they were pretty heavy because they weren't power assisted at that point. But it meant I was confident enough that I could get the car out of the garage. Just gonna have to give it a go, see if we can drive it. Inverter's on, drive is engaged, set to reverse. Here we go. It's moving, making a few noises, but this Porsche is driving under electric power. I will admit it was a little bit sketchy. No, it wasn't sketchy. I was just a little bit scared moving the car out. I hadn't driven it. To be honest, I hadn't driven this car. I'd gotten it into the garage, and even then it was that was sketchy in and of itself because the brakes didn't work, the handbrake didn't work, it was not fun. So this is my first time moving the car since then, obviously under electric power this time, and yeah, I was apprehensive, but yeah, we got it to go in and out of the garage, and that was amazing. It was moving under its own power. All the setup and everything was temporary battery, temporary mounts, but still it was running as an electric car, and I think it performed really well. But the main complaints I had was basically the brakes were really heavy because there was no power assisting or no brake booster, and the steering was really heavy. So trying to maneuver around the drive was tough. Took a lot of effort and a lot of back and forth. So I decided that at that point I needed to sort out the kind of ancillary components that I'd lost in removing the engine, namely power assisted steering and boosted brakes. First one I tackled was the power steering. So there's a time-honored tradition in EV conversions of using what is over this side of the world either a Vauxhall or Opel electric power steering pump. I think in the US it probably ends up on some GM stuff, but it's basically a very generic part. It's made by one of the main automotive kind of parts manufacturers, so it's used across a wide range of things, and turns out it's actually what they use on the Porsche Cup cars when they strip out all the accessory stuff and want to give it but still have it having power assisted steering. There they'll run at about £200 or £300. To buy a new one, you can get one off eBay for like 20. So that's what I did, and then I got some custom hoses made up to hook into the steering rack, and that worked a treat. When it switched on, it started pumping the fluid around. Once I eventually had it fully filled up, the power steering worked. It did need a strong battery because it is quite a drain, but it works. And with that done, then I decided also to try and sort out the brake booster. So the vacuum's normally coming from the manifold in the engine, but obviously we don't have that. Fortunately, diesel cars don't produce manifold vacuums, so there are a lot of electric vacuum pumps out there designed for the brake boosters. So I got one of those from I think it was an Audi, and yeah, kind of keep it in the family or closely related to the Porsche. And yeah, got that plumbed in, a bit of vacuum hose and a an on-off switch that detected the pressure, and we were good to go. So with those in, I had to go and test them. I had to run them around the driveway. This was actually around the time that we were all in lockdown for the first time, or certainly lockdown here in the UK. I think it had been a little bit earlier in a bunch of other countries, and I decided I was going to ramp up my video production to try and get, entertain people through lockdown. That didn't last very long because work just piled up on me. But I got a few extra videos out, and one of them, which was just me driving the car in and out and around the driveway, got picked up by an online EV magazine, and they kind of just put a little story about this guy building an electric car during lockdown, and got me a few thousand views, which was really cool. I hadn't seen a video get that many views that quickly. That gave me definitely a boost early in the year. And the benefit of being able to run the car, drive it, was that I could get the car out of the garage just in time for a delivery to come in, which was our battery. So I've been trying to decide what battery pack to go with. There are pros and cons of pretty much all the major EV batteries that you can get your hands on, and any one of them would have worked in this instance. But for me, it ended up coming down to availability and price as to the one that I was able to get my hands on. So I happened across on eBay a 40 kilowatt hour, which is the newest, or was one of the newest Leaf battery packs at the time. And it only had like less than 2,000 miles on it. So I figured a nearly new battery for the price I got it at, it was worth going for. I know I'll probably find limitations with it in the future, but it's going to get me going for now. So with the battery in the garage, I had the space that I was able to do a proper tear down on it. So I took the cover off and then started the process of actually stripping it back. So that was a lot of time spent tracing connections and trying to basically break the pack up into, first in half, then into like quarters and that, so that I was limiting the amount of voltage that I was exposed to if I'd accidentally dropped the spanner or something. But I'd taken a fair few precautions. I'd wrapped a lot of the tools in plastic and that, so the chances of accidentally shorting something was as limited as it could be. But yeah, we got we did an investigation of the battery pack, and then we stripped it back into the component parts and just kind of stored them around the garage. But with the battery in its kind of component parts, I had the modules there available, and it meant I could actually get the car back into the garage and then start trying to measure and visualize how I was going to fit the battery pack into the car. Holding things up, seeing how many wide I could get, what lengths they were, where they were going to foul on things. And I did a lot of measurements there, and both kind of the volume of the battery that it would take up, but also things like the weight and weight distribution, just to make sure that whatever I came up with wasn't going to, I guess, break the car, or certainly break the spirit of the car in terms of totally ruining the handling. It's always going to be a compromise. It's not exactly the same shape and size as the engine. The weight is slightly different, but as long as I could limit how different by thinking about it properly, then I figured I can at least make sure that the car will behave itself and work the way it's supposed to. These are cars that are known for handling well, and I wanted to stay that way. So once I had a vague idea of how I was going to mount the battery pack based on the individual modules, I then needed to actually build out the pack itself. So I've ended up going with basically 2 stacks of 12 battery modules, wired up in the same manner as they were in the Leaf, which has created a very simple structure, and one that hopefully should be easier to mount in the car. But it is different from the way it was in the Leaf itself. And that created a certain challenge, because the Leaf BMS and the way it's wired, if you get that wrong, it's taking a positive and negative from kind of each module in the pack. And if you send through the positive from one and the negative from another, you're sending a much larger voltage through that BMS, and people have managed to fry them, you know, sending signals that they shouldn't be sending. And then you have to go and buy a new one, and there are complications because there are a few different modules flying about there. So I spent quite a long time working out, based on how it had been wired in the Leaf, how it should be wired in my kind of design, and then yeah, basically broke apart all the plastic components that bolt onto the batteries themselves, and kind of isolate the different lugs. And I then got that wired up and plugged it into the BMS. There wasn't any smoke. I could hear the BMS running, so that was a good start. So the next thing was going to be trying to get data out of the BMS. Because the Leaf is a really well-selling EV, and people who buy EVs, you know, there are a fair few of them who want to know a little bit more about what's going on in the car. Some people had created an app that took the CAN messages that were being sent from the Leaf via the OBD2 port on the car, and basically read those CAN messages and interpreted them and plotted it on a graphic that was actually usable. So rather than having to try and find a way to you know, decipher the CAN myself, what I could do was basically just find the two CAN wires on the loom that the battery module came with, and yeah, hook that up to an OBD2 scanner, and then hook Leaf Spy up to that, and I was able to see that actually the battery was in really good health, very consistent voltages across the entire pack, but also it was at half charge, which is great. So with the pack kind of built out, I then could see exactly what the dimensions were going to be and start trying to figure out how to mount it in the car. I decided, I think kind of because of the year that was in it and the times of scarcity that we had, that I was going to reuse as much as possible of the Leaf battery box. So once I'd kind of identified what that was going to look like, I could start figuring out what extra bits of steel I needed, and to kind of build that back up, any rigidity that I'd lost by making cuts in the battery box, and then what mounts I'd need to make to fit that into the car. And at that point, a parcel landed on my doorstep which had the drive shafts that I'd sent away months ago. So basically I made custom drive shafts back in 2019, and I wanted, while they were fine for driving around the driveway, ultimately I wanted to have proper, you know, 100% drive shafts that I could be happy with. I didn't have to worry about how much power I was going to put through it if I eventually get to the stage of driving on the road and being able to put power through it. But so I got a company to basically take the drive shafts that I'd made and mimic them, but as a single piece of hardened steel, and those came back to me. I'd sent them off the parts in as an entire drive shaft, and they had to take that apart in order to make them. So what came back to me was yeah, a bit of a puzzle that I had to figure out on how to get it back together. So with those back in place, I kind of had a decision to make, because every time I install them, because they are a combination of kind of Porsche and Nissan parts, I have to basically disassemble the suspension in order to fit them, and I didn't want to have to do that too many times. So I figured now was probably a good time to start doing the permanent jobs on the car. So anything that I'd done temporarily, I was going to remove, get rid of all evidence of it, and then figure out how to do a permanent job. So that was things like removing the engine mounts that I'd made. There's just going to be too much flex in them, and I didn't want to risk the motor falling out on the road or anything like that. And yeah, I also took the opportunity while I had the car up on jack stands and was doing that to overhaul the suspension. That's kind of a job I've been planning to do just for the car. It's not specifically related to the EV conversion, but it's an old car. I've got easy access to the things at the moment, so I decided to replace them all. And we did a full refresh of the suspensions. That's all the track control arms, shocks in all four corners. The only parts really that are still there, because they still seem to be in good nick, are the springs. So hopefully I've get some more life out of them. And then one of the last jobs that I kind of got done before the end of the year was removing all the unnecessary pipework from the engine bay. This is something I should have done ages ago, because it just opens the space up so much and makes it much easier to work in. But I'd held off till now, but that was really satisfying. The one downside is that while going through all this, I was cleaning stuff away, I discovered quite a lot of rust on the rear sills, just by the rear wheel arches. It doesn't go very far into the car, but it is there, and it was pretty bad. So I've cut it out, and I'm going to have to kind of weld that back. So that's where we are. The car is at a point now where it's awaiting its permanent kind of EV transplant. So we've proven all the things work. We know where the motor's going to go. We know where the battery's going to go, and now I just need to get them into the car properly and get it sorted. So that's been our look back at 2020. I think on a whole, actually, I'm quite happy with the progress we've made. I managed to, get a lot of the groundwork done in the car for being able to run it on the road, and the target will be going into 2021 to try and get it there. But I hope that you've kind of enjoyed following this series over the last year. I hope 2020 has been as good to you as it can be. But yeah, a very happy new year, and we'll see you in 2021.